German weapons officer vanished in 1943. 82 years later, his locked facility was opened. March 17, 2025. The demolition crew arrived at the abandoned industrial complex outside Peenemünde, Germany, at 6:47 a.m. Their assignment seemed routine. Prepare the derelict concrete structure at coordinates 54, 1 degrees N, 13, 7 degrees E for controlled demolition to make way for a renewable energy facility. The building, officially designated as Storage Facility 7B on wartime blueprints, had been sealed since 1943, its reinforced steel doors rusted shut, its windows bricked over from the inside. Local records indicated it was merely a supply warehouse, deemed too contaminated with residual chemicals to warrant investigation during the decades of Cold War division that had left much of the site untouched. Demolition foreman Klaus Bergmann, 52, had worked in structural demolition for 28 years. He'd cleared dozens of World War II sites across northeastern Germany. This one, he assumed, would be no different. But when his crew's hydraulic cutters finally breached the outer door at 9:23 a.m., releasing a rush of stale air that had been trapped for 82 years, Bergmann knew immediately something was wrong. The space beyond wasn't a warehouse at all. The interior revealed itself in layers as their flashlights cut through the darkness. First, an antechamber with a steel security checkpoint, unusual for a supply depot. Then a corridor lined with filing cabinets, their drawers still partially open, manila folders scattered across the concrete floor where they'd fallen decades ago. Technical drawings covered one wall, held in place by rusted pins. Detailed schematics of the V-2 rocket, the Wasserfall anti-aircraft missile, and weapons systems that Bergmann didn't recognize. At the corridor's end stood another door, this one bearing a brass plate tarnished almost black with age. Dr. Helena Voss, the state-appointed archaeological supervisor, arrived at 11:15 a.m. She carefully cleaned the nameplate with a soft brush, revealing Gothic script: Hauptmann Dieter Wilhelm von Roth, Waffenamt Prüfwesen, Raketenwaffen in Entwicklung. Captain Dieter Wilhelm von Roth, Weapons Office Testing Authority, Rocket Weapons Development. The date beneath read, January 1943. The room beyond the captain's nameplate stopped everyone cold. It was a personal office and living quarters combined, preserved as if its occupant had simply stepped out for lunch and never returned. A leather chair sat behind a massive oak desk. Technical manuals lined floor-to-ceiling bookshelves: physics, chemistry, aerodynamics, metallurgy. A narrow bed occupied one corner, its Wehrmacht tissue blanket still neatly folded. On the desk sat a leather-bound logbook, a fountain pen laid precisely perpendicular across its cover. And beside the logbook, in a silver frame, a photograph of a young officer in Wehrmacht uniform, his wife, and two small children, perhaps 4 and 6 years old. Dr. Voss opened the logbook with gloved hands. The final entry was dated October 17, 1943. Final systems check complete. Evacuation protocols in effect. They will believe I perished in tonight's operation. By the time anyone reads this, if anyone ever does, I will be beyond their reach. Merge Gott mir vergeben. May God forgive me. The official Wehrmacht records, declassified in 1975, told a different story. According to military documentation filed on October 18, 1943, Hauptmann Dieter von Roth died in an accidental explosion during a late-night test firing of an experimental rocket motor. The blast supposedly incinerated his body beyond recognition. His personal effects were returned to his elderly mother in Hamburg. A death certificate was issued. His name appeared on the memorial wall at Peenemünde's military cemetery. The German government paid survivor benefits to his mother until her death in 1957. But as Dr. Voss turned the logbook's pages backward, reading entries from the weeks before October 17th, a very different narrative emerged. Von Roth had been planning something. References to alternate documentation, Argentinian contacts, southern route, and sufficient gold reserve appeared with increasing frequency throughout September and early October 1943. On September 3rd, he'd written, "The war is lost. The only question is how long until the inevitable. I will not wait for the noose." In the filing cabinets, investigators would later find forged identity papers in the name Daniel Richter, dated September 1943, bearing von Roth's photograph. They found contact information for a network of safe houses stretching from Denmark through Spain. They found inventory lists of technical documents he'd photographed and planned to take with him, information that would be worth a fortune to the right buyers after Germany's defeat. And hidden behind a false panel in the desk, they found something that would crack the case wide open. A sealed metal box containing 38 gold coins stamped with the Reichsadler Swiss franc banknotes totaling 50,000 francs, and a folded letter addressed to his mother, never sent, explaining everything. The discovery sent shockwaves through the historical community. Hauptmann Dieter Wilhelm von Roth was not an ordinary Wehrmacht officer. He was one of the Third Reich's most promising young weapons engineers, personally recruited by Wernher von Braun, holder of 3 patents for rocket stabilization systems, and a man with access to some of Nazi Germany's most closely guarded military secrets. If he had staged his death and escaped with classified information in October 1943, more than 18 months before the war's end, where had he gone? How had he done it? And most troubling, what secrets had he sold and to whom? If you want to see what investigators found when they traced von Roth's 82-year-old escape route across 2 continents, hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Because what they discovered hiding in plain sight will force us to rewrite what we thought we knew about how Nazi war criminals escaped justice. Dieter Wilhelm von Roth was born on June 14, 1911, in Heidelberg, Germany, the youngest son of a minor aristocratic family, whose fortunes had been diminished by World War I. His father, Ernst von Roth, had served as a captain in the Imperial German Army's Artillery Corps, and returned from the war physically unscathed but psychologically shattered, never truly recovering from what he witnessed in the trenches of Verdun. His mother, Margarethe, came from a line of academics. Her father had been a professor of chemistry at Heidelberg University. Young Dieter inherited his grandfather's aptitude for science and mathematics. He excelled at the Heidelberg Gymnasium, showing particular brilliance in physics and mechanical engineering, while his older brothers pursued traditional military careers, viewing science as beneath their aristocratic station. Dieter was drawn to the emerging field of aeronautical engineering. In 1929, at age 18, he enrolled at the Technical University of Berlin, where he studied under some of Germany's most innovative aerospace theorists. His doctoral thesis, completed in 1935, focused on gyroscopic stabilization systems for guided projectiles, precisely the kind of research that would soon interest Germany's rapidly expanding military-industrial complex. The thesis caught the attention of the Army Weapons Office, Heereswaffenamt, which was secretly funding research into rocket technology despite the constraints of the Versailles Treaty. In March 1936, at just 24 years old, von Roth received a letter inviting him to interview at a facility called Kummersdorf, located south of Berlin. At Kummersdorf, von Roth met Wernher von Braun, then 33 and already directing Germany's most ambitious rocket development program. Von Braun saw in the young engineer exactly what the program needed: theoretical brilliance combined with practical problem-solving ability. By June 1936, von Roth was a civilian engineer with the Army's Rocket Research Division, assigned to solve the persistent problem of rocket instability during powered flight. Within 8 months, he developed a modified gyroscope system that reduced flight deviation by 43%, a breakthrough that earned him his first patent and a formal commission as a Wehrmacht officer with the rank of lieutenant, second lieutenant. His personal life during this period was stable and by all accounts happy. In September 1937, he married Anna Hoffmann, the daughter of a Berlin physician. Their first child, Klaus, was born in July 1938. Their daughter, Greta, followed in March 1940. Photographs from this era, preserved in family albums that would later become evidence, show a young father visibly proud of his growing family. Colleagues remembered him as dedicated but warm, someone who kept photographs of his children on his desk and never missed dinner at home, unless absolutely required by his work. By 1939, von Roth held the rank of Hauptmann captain and worked at the newly constructed Peenemünde facility on Germany's Baltic coast. Peenemünde was Hitler's obsession, a vast complex dedicated to developing the Vergeltungswaffen, the vengeance weapons that would supposedly turn the tide of the coming war. The facility sprawled across miles of coastline, test stands, production facilities, housing for thousands of engineers and technicians, even a power plant and airfield. It was Germany's most expensive military project, consuming resources desperately needed elsewhere as the war expanded across Europe. Von Roth's specialty was the guidance and control systems for the A-4 rocket, which would become infamous as the V-2. He held 3 patents by 1941, 2 for gyroscopic stabilization improvements, and 1 for a novel servomotor system that controlled the rocket's graphite vanes. These inventions made him valuable, perhaps too valuable. While other officers rotated to combat commands, von Roth remained at Peenemünde, classified as unabkömmlich, indispensable to the war effort. His expertise kept him safe from the Eastern Front, where so many of his former university classmates were dying in the frozen vastness of Russia. But that safety came with its own burdens. Von Roth was not a committed Nazi. His family had been traditional conservatives, skeptical of Hitler's rise but unwilling to resist it. Like many in Germany's technical elite, von Roth rationalized his work as serving Germany rather than the Nazi Party. He told himself that rockets were instruments of technology, morally neutral, their use determined by others. Documents from Peenemunde's administrative files show he was never a member of the Nazi Party, unusual for an officer of his rank, and likely only possible because his technical skills were irreplaceable. The moral compromise became harder to maintain as the war ground on. By 1943, von Roth was fully aware of the slave labor being used to construct Peenemunde's facilities. Concentration camp prisoners worked on the construction sites, their striped uniforms visible from the engineering offices. He knew that the V-2 rockets he helped perfect would be manufactured by slave labor in underground factories. He knew that the weapons would be launched indiscriminately at civilian populations in London, Antwerp, and other Allied cities, and he was beginning to understand that Germany was losing the war. His personal circumstances deteriorated in lockstep with Germany's military fortunes. In July 1943, Anna and the children were living with her parents in Hamburg, while von Roth worked at Peenemünde, visiting when he could get leave. On the night of July 27, 1943, the Royal Air Force launched Operation Gomorrah, a massive firebombing raid that created a firestorm in Hamburg's residential districts. The temperatures reached 800 degrees Celsius. The fires consumed oxygen faster than people could breathe. Approximately 37,000 civilians died that night. Anna von Roth, 31 years old, died in the basement of her parents' home, where the family had taken shelter. Klaus, 5 years old, died beside her. Greta, 3, died in her grandmother's arms. Anna's parents also perished in the inferno. The entire family was incinerated, identifiable only by dental records and the location where their bodies were found. Von Roth received the news via military telegram on July 29, 1943. According to testimony from colleagues later interviewed by historians, he disappeared for 3 days. When he returned to work on August 1st, he was visibly changed, hollow-eyed, mechanical in his movements, speaking only when necessary. A fellow engineer, Dr. Ernst Keller, later recalled, It was as if Dieter had died with his family. The man who came back to Peenemünde was just wearing Dieter's face. But inside, something harder and colder was forming. Von Roth's logbook entries from August 1943, now in the possession of Germany's Federal Archives, show a man making calculations of a different kind. He was assessing his options. The war was lost. Anyone with access to intelligence reports could see that. The Battle of Stalingrad had ended in disaster. The Allies had invaded Italy. The bombing of German cities was intensifying. It was only a matter of time before the entire Nazi edifice collapsed. When that happened, von Roth knew exactly what awaited people like him. The Allies would hunt down anyone connected to Germany's weapons programs. The rockets he'd helped create would be evidence of war crimes, weapons deliberately targeting civilians. His expertise might buy him some mercy if he surrendered to the Americans or British, perhaps even recruitment to their own rocket programs. But it might also mean years in a prisoner of war camp, or worse, if the Soviets captured him first. The Red Army's treatment of German technical personnel in occupied territories was already legendary in its brutality. There was another option, whispered about in certain circles at Peenemünde. Some officers were preparing contingency plans, false identities, hidden assets, escape routes. A network existed, or was forming, that could help the right people disappear when the time came. Von Roth, methodical engineer that he was, began researching this network with the same systematic approach he applied to rocket stabilization problems. By September 1943, von Roth had made his decision. He had nothing left in Germany, no family, no real loyalty to a regime he'd never truly believed in, no desire to face whatever justice or vengeance awaited him after the war. He possessed valuable technical knowledge, access to classified documents, and enough understanding of chemistry and physics to make himself useful to any nation seeking to develop advanced weapons. What he needed was a way out, and the means to build a new life somewhere the past couldn't reach him. He began his preparations with characteristic precision. First, he needed currency that would hold value after Germany's inevitable collapse. Through carefully cultivated contacts in the SS administrative offices, men who were making similar preparations, he traded scientific information for gold coins and Swiss francs. A single tip about gyroscope specifications in exchange for 5 gold Reichsadler coins. A copied set of propulsion system blueprints for 10,000 Swiss francs. By October 1943, he'd accumulated a fortune by wartime standards. 38 gold coins and 50,000 francs hidden in his sealed office at Peenemünde. Second, he needed documentation. The same network that provided currency could provide false papers. By late September, von Roth possessed identity documents in the name of Daniel Richter, a civilian engineer supposedly born in Innsbruck in 1912, with work permits and travel papers that would pass all but the most rigorous inspection. Third, he needed an exit strategy that would convince everyone he was dead. Simply deserting would trigger a manhunt. But if he died in a plausible accident at a facility where dangerous experiments occurred regularly, the investigation would be perfunctory. An explosion, a fire, a body burned beyond recognition. These things happened at Peenemünde. The authorities would want the matter closed quickly, the negative publicity minimized. Fourth, he needed a route. Through his contacts, he learned of a network stretching from northern Germany through Denmark, down through France or Spain, and ultimately to South America. Others had used it successfully. The route required money, nerve, and perfect timing, all of which von Roth possessed. By mid-October 1943, Hauptmann Dieter Wilhelm von Roth was ready to become Daniel Richter. He was ready to stage his own death, abandon his country, and disappear into a new identity. He was 32 years old, already a widower who'd lost everything, a brilliant engineer with blood on his hands and secrets worth selling. The man who stared out from the photograph on his desk, young, proud, standing beside his beautiful wife and innocent children, would die in an explosion on the night of October 17, 1943. But the man who walked away from Peenemünde that same night would live for decades more, carrying those secrets into a new world. October 3, 1943, 14:30 hours. Von Roth sat in his sealed office, reviewing what he now thought of as the inventory, the list of documents he would photograph and take with him, technical specifications for the A4 guidance system, drawings of experimental designs that hadn't reached production, chemical formulas for specialized propellants, test data on high-altitude performance, material stress calculations. Each document represented years of research, billions of Reichsmarks in development costs, and potentially immense value to any nation seeking to develop its own rocket program. He'd acquired a miniature camera, a Minox originally designed for espionage work, from his SS contacts. Over the next 2 weeks, working late at night when the facility was minimally staffed, he would systematically photograph the most valuable documents in Peenemünde's technical library. The film cassettes, each no larger than his thumb, would slip easily into the lining of his jacket. When developed, they would contain Germany's most closely guarded rocket secrets. October 8, 1943, 09:15 hours. Von Roth attended the weekly engineering staff meeting. The topic was the upcoming test firing schedule for November. Oberst Colonel Walter Dornberger, the military commander of Peenemünde, outlined plans for a series of night launches designed to test the A4's range capabilities. Von Roth volunteered his team for the preparatory work on Test Stand VII, where the most powerful engines were evaluated. His offer was accepted without question. Von Roth was known for his dedication, often working 16-hour days, sleeping in his office rather than returning to his assigned housing. What his colleagues didn't know was that Test Stand VII was part of his plan. The test stand's location on the northern edge of the complex, nearest to the Baltic coast, made it ideal for his purposes. Its isolation meant fewer witnesses. Its association with dangerous experiments meant that an accidental explosion would surprise no one. And the specific test he was ostensibly preparing, a full-duration burn of an experimental engine design, was precisely the kind of operation that could go catastrophically wrong. October 12, 1943, 23:45 hours. Von Roth worked alone in Test Stand VII's control bunker, officially conducting pre-test calibrations. In reality, he was stage managing the scene of his death. He'd brought a Wehrmacht uniform and boots, both in approximately his size, obtained from the facility's supply depot. He'd also brought animal bones, sheep bones, purchased from a local butcher under the pretense of needing them for a material stress experiment that would be burned beyond recognition in the explosion he planned to stage. He placed the uniform and bones in the engine test chamber, positioning them where a body would naturally fall if someone had been standing at the engine's manual control station when it exploded. He adjusted the fuel mixture to ensure maximum explosive force. He set timers that would allow him to be 2 kilometers away when the blast occurred. He was creating a crime scene that would tell the story of a tragic accident. Dedicated engineer working late, catastrophic fuel explosion, body incinerated. October 15, 1943, 16:20 hours. Von Roth drove to nearby Zinnowitz, a coastal town 8 kilometers south of Peenemünde, ostensibly to inspect a supplier's facility. In reality, he met with a man named Oscar, no last name given, no rank, no clear organizational affiliation. Oscar was part of the network, one of the facilitators who helped people disappear. They spoke for 17 minutes in Oscar's car, parked overlooking the Baltic Sea. "Everything is arranged," Oscar told him. October 17, 23 hours, the fishing dock at Karlshagen, a boat will be waiting. The captain will ask you what kind of fish you're hopping to catch. You will answer, "Nothing from these waters." That is the recognition code. The boat will take you to Denmark. In Copenhagen, you will go to Vesterbrogade 47, the apartment above the pharmacy. Wait there for further instructions. Bring only what you can carry in one bag. Bring your documentation and your currency. Leave everything else behind. You will never come back here. Do you understand?" Von Roth understood. He paid Oscar 15,000 Swiss francs, nearly a third of his hidden fortune. The man counted the bills carefully, nodded, and drove away. Von Roth returned to Peenemünde with 2 days remaining before his death. October 16, 1943, 18 hours. Von Roth sat in his sealed office for what he knew would be the last time. He wrote the final entry in his logbook, the entry that Dr. Voss would read 82 years later. "Final systems check complete. Evacuation protocols in effect. They will believe I perished in tonight's operation." He dated it October 17th, preparing it for the following evening. He placed his fountain pen across the cover with geometric precision. Then he began his last preparations. He packed a single leather overnight bag with essentials, 2 changes of civilian clothes, toiletries, the false identity papers for Daniel Richter, the miniature camera and film cassettes containing classified documents, and the metal box with the gold coins and most of the remaining Swiss francs. The box felt heavy in his hands, the weight of his future, purchased with treason. He looked around the office one final time, the bookshelves filled with technical manuals, the desk where he'd worked on the calculations that made the V2 possible, the photograph of Anna and the children. He picked up the frame, studying their faces. Klaus would have been 5 years old now. Greta 3. They would never grow older than they were in this photograph. Hamburg's flames had stopped their time forever. Von Roth placed the photograph face down on the desk. He couldn't take it with him. Daniel Richter would not have a family photo of Hauptmann von Roth's wife and children. But he couldn't bring himself to destroy it either. Let it remain here, he thought, a memorial in a tomb that would never be opened. Let this version of his life be sealed away with his name and rank and everything he'd been before the war consumed it all. October 17, 1943, 19:30 hours. Von Roth conducted his final rounds at test stand VII. 2 enlisted technicians were present, assisting with final preparations for the scheduled test. Von Roth sent them back to the main complex at 20:15 hours, telling them he would conduct the last calibrations himself. This was unusual but not unprecedented. Von Roth was known to prefer working alone on delicate procedures. At 20:45 hours, with test stand VII deserted and darkness complete over the Baltic coast, Von Roth activated the timer mechanisms he'd secretly installed. In exactly 90 minutes, at 22:15 hours, the fuel tanks would ignite. The explosion would destroy the test stand and incinerate everything within. The false body, uniform, bones, and all, would be burned beyond any possibility of identification. By the time anyone investigated, Von Roth would be on a fishing boat heading for Denmark. He walked away from test stand VII at 20:52 hours, carrying his leather bag. He wore civilian clothes under his Wehrmacht greatcoat, dark wool trousers, a brown jacket, a cap pulled low over his eyes. He moved through the shadows at the edge of Peenemünde's sprawling complex, avoiding the main roads, following a route he'd scouted carefully. The October night was cold, wind coming off the Baltic carrying the smell of salt and seaweed. At 21:30 hours, Von Roth reached the perimeter fence at Peenemünde's northeastern corner. This section was lightly guarded, most security focused on the main gates and the technical areas. He'd chosen this spot because it faced the coastal forest, not the open beach. He used wire cutters, obtained weeks earlier, to create a gap in the fence large enough to slip through. In 30 seconds, he was outside Peenemünde for the last time, standing in the darkness of the pine forest that stretched between the facility and the small fishing village of Karlshagen. The walk to Karlshagen took 43 minutes. Von Roth moved carefully through the forest, his eyes adjusting to the darkness, his engineer's mind automatically calculating distances and directions. He emerged from the trees at 22:18 hours at the northern edge of Karlshagen village. Behind him, in the direction of Peenemünde, he saw a flash of orange light, followed seconds later by the deep, rolling boom of an explosion. He felt it through the ground beneath his feet, the shock wave traveling through the earth, announcing his death. Test stand VII was gone. The explosion would have been visible for kilometers, lighting up the night sky. Emergency crews would already be responding. Within an hour, they would find the remains of a body burned beyond recognition. Within 24 hours, Hauptmann Dieter Wilhelm von Roth would be officially declared dead, killed in a tragic accident while conducting a late-night engine test. His mother would receive a telegram. His name would be added to Peenemoon's memorial wall. Von Roth walked down to Karlshagen's fishing dock at 22:35 hours. A small fishing boat was tied there, its motor idling quietly. A man stood on the dock, smoking a cigarette. He looked up as von Roth approached. "What kind of fish are you hoping to catch?" the man asked. "Nothing from these waters," von Roth replied. The man nodded and gestured toward the boat. Von Roth climbed aboard. The captain, if that's what he was, untied the mooring lines and pushed off from the dock. The boat's motor coughed to life, louder now, and they moved out into the Baltic's darkness. Von Roth looked back once and saw the glow from the fire at Peenemoon reflected against the low clouds. October 18, 1943, 4 hours. The fishing boat reached the Danish coast near Jedser at the southern tip of Denmark. Von Roth had spent the crossing below deck, huddled against the cold, listening to the Baltic's waves slapping the hull. The captain said nothing to him the entire journey. When they reached Denmark, the captain simply gestured to the shore and said, "There are bicycles hidden in the dunes, third position north of the marker stone. Take one. Follow the coast road to Jedser." The train to Copenhagen leaves at 06:30. Von Roth waded ashore in knee-deep water, his leather bag held above his head. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, the long Baltic dawn of October. He found the bicycles where the captain said they would be, cached under driftwood and dried seaweed. He took one and began riding north along the coastal road, his legs pumping steadily, his breath visible in the cold morning air. At 6 hours, he reached Jedser's small train station. He purchased a ticket to Copenhagen using Danish krone. He'd converted some of his Swiss francs weeks earlier, anticipating exactly this moment. He bought the ticket in the name of Daniel Richter, presenting his false papers to the ticket clerk, who barely glanced at them. To the clerk, he was just another civilian engineer traveling on business, unremarkable, forgettable. The train departed at 06:31 hours. Von Roth found a seat in an empty compartment and watched the Danish countryside roll past the window. Flat farmland, small villages, the occasional glimpse of the sea. He was exhausted. He hadn't slept in nearly 24 hours, but he couldn't allow himself to rest yet. Not until he reached Copenhagen. Not until he was safely hidden in the safe house at Vesterbrogade 47. October 18, 1943, 11:20 hours. The train arrived at Copenhagen's central station. Von Roth emerged into the bustling crowd of the Danish capital, just another anonymous traveler. Despite Denmark being under German occupation, Copenhagen retained a veneer of normalcy. Cafes were open. People went about their business. The occupation was relatively light here compared to Poland or France. The Danes had negotiated a degree of autonomy in exchange for cooperation. Von Roth walked from the station to Vesterbrogade, a major street in Copenhagen's Vesterbro district. Number 47 was a 3-story building with a pharmacy on the ground floor and apartments above. He climbed the narrow stairs to the 3rd floor and knocked on the door to apartment 3B. An elderly woman answered. Gray hair, severe expression, eyes that assessed him instantly. "Daniel Richter," von Roth said, "I'm expected." The woman said nothing. She simply stepped aside and allowed him to enter. The apartment was small but clean. One room with a bed, a table, 2 chairs, a sink, and a small stove. A window overlooked the street below. The woman pointed to the bed and said in German-accented Danish, "Wait here. Do not leave. Someone will come with instructions. There is food in the cupboard. If anyone knocks, do not answer unless they use the name Daniel twice." Then she left, closing the door behind her. Von Roth heard the key turn in the lock from outside. He was a prisoner in a sense, but a willing one. This was how the network operated, compartmentalized, secure, trusting no one more than necessary. He was safe here, or as safe as a wanted man could be. He collapsed onto the bed, fully clothed, his leather bag still clutched against his chest. Through the window, he could hear the sounds of Copenhagen, trams rattling past, people talking, the normal sounds of a city at midday. In Germany, they were investigating the explosion at Peenemünde. They were examining the charred remains at Teststand VII. They were preparing to notify his mother that her last surviving child was dead. But Hauptmann Dieter Wilhelm von Roth was not dead. He was lying on a bed in Copenhagen, having successfully faked his death and escaped Germany. The difficult part, he told himself, was over. He was wrong. The journey had only just begun. March 18, 2025, 11 hours. Dr. Helena Voss stood in what had been Hauptmann von Roth's sealed office, now brilliantly illuminated by portable LED arrays brought in by the investigation team. The German Federal Archives had dispatched 3 senior historians within hours of the discovery. The State Criminal Police Office, Landeskriminalamt, sent forensic specialists. The Simon Wiesenthal Center in Vienna contacted the German government, requesting access to any documents found, concerned that von Roth might have been involved in war crimes beyond his weapons development work. Dr. Voss had spent the past 4 hours carefully documenting the office's contents. Every item was photographed in situ, cataloged, and carefully removed for analysis. The leather logbook alone represented a historical find of significant importance, a primary source document detailing the final weeks of a German weapons officer who had faked his death. But it was the metal box from the false panel in the desk that transformed this from an interesting historical discovery into a full-scale investigation. The box's contents were laid out on an examination table: 38 gold Reichsadler coins, dated between 1937 and 1943, Swiss franc banknotes totaling 50,000 francs, issued by various Swiss banks in 1942 and 1943, and the letter, 3 pages, handwritten in precise Gothic script, addressed to Mein liebste Mutter, my dearest mother. Dr. Voss read the letter aloud to the assembled investigators, her voice steady despite the document's emotional content. Mother, if you are reading this, then I am either dead in truth, or I have succeeded in my plan and you have found these words where I told you they would be. I pray it is the latter. I cannot live in the Germany that is coming. I cannot face what they will do to people like me when this war ends, as it must. Anna and the children are gone. Everything I loved burned in Hamburg. I have nothing left but my knowledge and my will to survive. I am leaving, Mother. By the time you read this, I will be far from Germany. Do not look for me. Do not speak my name. Let them believe I died at Peenemünde. It is safer for you if you believe it too. The money I have left here is for you, compensation for the son you are losing, inadequate though it is. Use it carefully. Convert it slowly. Trust no one with the knowledge of where it came from. I know you will judge me for what I am doing. I judge myself. I helped build weapons that kill innocents. I served a regime I despised out of cowardice and ambition. Now I am fleeing rather than facing justice. These are my sins, and I will carry them wherever I go. But I will not carry them to the gallows. I will not give them the satisfaction of hanging me for doing what they ordered me to do. If there is a God, he will judge me in time. Until then, I choose to live. Forgive me if you can. Your son, Dieter. The letter was dated October 16, 1943, one day before his staged death. The handwriting matched samples of von Roth's writing from his official personnel file, but the letter had never been sent. Von Roth had sealed it in the box with the money, perhaps intending to retrieve it later and send it to his mother, then deciding against it. Or perhaps he'd realized that sending such a letter would expose his survival and endanger both himself and his mother. Dr. Voss made arrangements for the letter to be analyzed by forensic document examiners at the Federal Criminal Police Office, Bundeskriminalamt, in Wiesbaden. The coins and banknotes would be examined for fingerprints, a long shot given their age, but modern forensic techniques could sometimes recover prints from metal and paper even decades later. March 19, 2025. The story broke in the German media. Nazi weapons officer faked death, sealed office reveals, ran the headline in Der Spiegel. The discovery ignited public fascination and historical debate. Social media exploded with speculation about where von Roth had gone, whether he'd survived the war, and what had become of the classified documents he'd clearly planned to steal. The Simon Wiesenthal Center issued a statement calling for a comprehensive investigation into von Roth's potential war crimes. The development of the V-2 rocket involved massive use of slave labor, the statement read. Approximately 20,000 concentration camp prisoners died building these weapons in underground factories. Anyone involved in the V-2 program at any level must be investigated for potential complicity in crimes against humanity. Dr. Voss assembled a team of researchers to reconstruct von Roth's life and track his movements after October 1943. They began with his personnel file from the Wehrmacht archives, declassified decades earlier. The file painted a picture of a brilliant but ultimately ordinary officer, technically gifted, politically uninvolved, personally devastated by his family's death in Hamburg. But the file also contained something investigators had never properly examined: von Roth's financial records. Wehrmacht officers' pay was meticulously documented. Von Roth earned 450 Reichsmarks monthly as a Hauptmann, a comfortable middle-class salary, but not extraordinary. Yet his bank records showed only minimal activity. He deposited his pay and made small withdrawals for living expenses. The records showed no major purchases, no investments, no indication of where a man might have accumulated 50,000 Swiss francs and 38 gold coins. Financial investigator Matthias Keller, assigned to the case by the Federal Criminal Police, spent 3 days analyzing von Roth's banking history. On March 22, he made a breakthrough. Von Roth's bank records showed a series of small deposits throughout 1943, amounts ranging from 200 to 800 Reichsmarks, always in cash, always with vague notations like technical consulting or research advisory. Keller cross-referenced these deposits with SS financial records, a massive database of transactions that had been digitized over the past decade as part of ongoing Nazi-era financial accountability projects. He found matches. The SS had made payments to technical consultants from Peenemünde throughout 1943. The consultants weren't named in the records, but the amounts matched perfectly with von Roth's mysterious deposits. Von Roth was selling information to the SS, Keller concluded in his report. The SS was preparing for Germany's defeat. They were compiling technical intelligence they could use as bargaining chips or sell to other nations. Von Roth traded secrets for hard currency, gold and Swiss francs that would retain value after the Reichsmark collapsed. He wasn't just planning to escape. He was funding his escape with treason. March 25, 2025. The investigation team received a surprise communication from Argentina. Dr. Rosa Martinez, a historian at the National University of Buenos Aires who specialized in German immigration to Argentina after World War II, had read about the von Roth discovery. She contacted Dr. Voss with information that exploded the case wide open. "I believe Hauptmann von Roth may have survived to reach Argentina," Dr. Martinez wrote in her email. "I've been researching German immigrants who arrived in Argentina between 1943 and 1950, cross-referencing their stated backgrounds with German records. One case has always puzzled me. In January 1944, a man named Daniel Richter arrived in Buenos Aires from Spain, claiming to be an Austrian engineer who had fled the Nazi annexation of Austria in 1938. His papers appeared legitimate, Austrian birth certificate, engineering credentials, work history, but I could never verify his background in Austrian archives. Now that I've seen the photograph of Hauptmann von Roth, I believe Daniel Richter and von Roth may be the same person. Dr. Martinez attached a scanned document to her email, an Argentine immigration form dated January 17, 1944, bearing the name Daniel Richter, birthplace listed as Innsbruck, profession listed as mechanical engineer. The form included a small photograph, poor quality, grainy black and white, but clearly showing a man in his early 30s with the same bone structure, same slight asymmetry in the eyes, same shape of ears visible in photographs of von Roth. Dr. Voss immediately contacted facial recognition experts at the University of Berlin's Department of Biometric Analysis. The experts used advanced software to compare the 1944 immigration photograph with known photographs of von Roth from his Wehrmacht personnel file. The software analyzed 19 distinct facial biometric points: the distance between eyes, the angle of the jawline, the shape of the ear cartilage, the spacing of facial features. On March 28th, the experts delivered their analysis. Biometric comparison indicates a 91.7% probability that the individual in the Argentine immigration photograph is the same person as Hauptmann Dieter Wilhelm von Roth. This probability is high enough to establish identity for investigative purposes, though not sufficient for legal proceedings without additional corroborating evidence. The investigation now had a trail. Von Roth had escaped Germany in October 1943, traveled under the identity of Daniel Richter, and reached Argentina by January 1944. The next question was, how had he gotten from Copenhagen in October 1943 to Buenos Aires in January 1944? April 2, 2025. Dr. Voss traveled to Copenhagen to investigate the Danish phase of von Roth's escape. The address from von Roth's sealed office, Vesterbrogade 47, still existed, though the pharmacy was now a mobile phone store, and the apartments above had been renovated multiple times since 1943. Danish National Archives held records of German occupation activities. Voss and a team of Danish researchers spent 5 days searching through boxes of documents, police reports, surveillance records, resistance movement files, and immigration records. They found references to Vesterbrogade 47. During the war, the building had been under surveillance by Danish resistance members who suspected it was being used as a safe house by Germans fleeing the occupation authorities or by Danish resistance fighters hiding from the Germans. A resistance report dated November 1943 noted, continued activity at V47, unknown individuals arriving and departing at irregular intervals, always by night, suspect involvement in Ratline operations. Ratline operations, the term used for escape routes that help people flee from one territory to another. But the most significant find came from Swedish archives. Sweden, neutral during World War II, maintained meticulous border control records. Dr. Voss contacted the Swedish National Archives and requested information about border crossings from Denmark to Sweden in late 1943. On April 8th, the Swedish archives sent their response. A Daniel Richter, Austrian engineer, had entered Sweden at Helsingborg on October 26, 1943, crossing from Denmark on the Helsingør-Helsingborg ferry. His papers indicated he was traveling to Stockholm on business for a Danish engineering firm. Swedish authorities, who carefully tracked all foreigners during the war, recorded that Richter stayed in Stockholm for 3 nights, at a boarding house on Gamla Brogatan, then departed Sweden on October 29th, taking a train to Göteborg and boarding a ship bound for Spain. The trail was becoming clearer. Von Roth had reached Copenhagen on October 18th, spent approximately a week in hiding at the Vesterbrogade safe house, then traveled to Sweden on October 26th. From Sweden, he made his way to Spain, a neutral country with established roots to South America. April 15, 2025. Spanish historian Dr. Juan Carlos Mendoza, contacted by Dr. Vaz, searched Spanish immigration records. He found Daniel Richter entering Spain at the port of Barcelona on November 12, 1943, arriving aboard a Swedish cargo ship. Richter declared himself a refugee from German-occupied Austria, seeking passage to South America. Spanish authorities granted him a temporary residence permit. Dr. Mendoza discovered something else. In 1943 and 1944, Spain was the primary European exit point for people fleeing to South America, both refugees and Nazi officials preparing escape routes. The Spanish port city of Cadiz, in particular, served as the departure point for ships to Argentina. Records from the Argentine consulate in Madrid showed that Daniel Richter received an immigration visa for Argentina on December 19, 1943. Passenger manifests from the ship Monte Pascual, which departed Cadiz on January 3, 1944, and arrived in Buenos Aires on January 16, 1944, listed Daniel Richter, engineer, Austrian national, in third-class accommodations. The voyage took 13 days, crossing the Atlantic to Argentina. The complete escape route was now reconstructed. Peenemünde to Denmark, October 17-18, 1943. Denmark to Sweden, October 18-26, 1943. Sweden to Spain, October 29-November 12, 1943. Spain to Argentina, January 3-16, 1944. The entire journey took exactly 91 days from the night of von Roth's faked death to his arrival in Buenos Aires as Daniel Richter. April 20th, 2025. Dr. Martinez in Buenos Aires conducted her own investigation into Daniel Richter's life in Argentina. Immigration records showed Richter listed his profession as mechanical engineer and indicated he planned to seek employment in Argentina's growing industrial sector. Argentine immigration policy in the 1940s actively encouraged European engineers and technicians to settle in Argentina. President Juan Perón's government wanted to modernize Argentina's industry and military, and European technical expertise was highly valued. But Dr. Martinez made a disturbing discovery. Daniel Richter's name appeared in connection with the Huemul Island nuclear project, a bizarre and ultimately failed attempt by Argentina to develop nuclear fusion technology in the late 1940s. The project was led by Austrian physicist Ronald Richter, no relation to Daniel Richter, despite the surname coincidence, who claimed he could achieve nuclear fusion using secret German wartime research. Records from the Huemul project, declassified in the 1990s, showed that Daniel Richter worked as a technical consultant to the project from 1948 to 1951, advising on mechanical engineering aspects of the fusion reactor's design. The project was exposed as fraudulent in 1952, but Richter was never implicated in the fraud. He was merely a consultant, and the fraud was entirely Ronald Richter's doing. What this meant, however, was that von Roth had successfully inserted himself into Argentina's technical scientific community, leveraging his expertise to build a new life. He wasn't hiding in poverty or isolation. He was working, earning money, perhaps even enjoying a degree of professional respect under his false identity. April 28, 2025. The investigation received an unexpected contact. A man named Thomas Richter, 73 years old, living in the Argentine city of Mendoza, had seen news reports about the von Roth investigation. He contacted Dr. Martinez with a stunning claim. Daniel Richter was my father. I never knew his real name was von Roth until I saw the news, but I always suspected he was hiding something about his past. Thomas Richter agreed to be interviewed. In a video call with Dr. Vaz and Dr. Martinez on April 30th, he told his story. My father never talked about his life before Argentina. He said his family died in the war, that he fled Austria to escape the Nazis. He married my mother, Elena, in 1946. I was born in 1952. My sister Anna was born in 1955. We had a normal life. My father worked as an engineer for various companies in Buenos Aires. We lived in a comfortable apartment. I went to good schools. But there were strange things. My father never had contact with relatives in Europe. He never wanted his photograph taken. He always made excuses to avoid cameras. He spoke German at home, but insisted I learn Spanish and English, not German. He never celebrated his birthday. He said birthdays were unimportant. And sometimes, late at night, I would wake up and hear him crying in his study. When I asked my mother about it, she said my father had lost people he loved in the war, and sometimes the grief overwhelmed him. He died in 1989, just after the Berlin Wall fell. I remember he watched the news about Germany's reunification obsessively. He seemed agitated by it. He died of a heart attack 3 weeks after the wall came down. He was 78 years old. We buried him in Chacarita Cemetery in Buenos Aires under the name Daniel Richter. Thomas agreed to provide a DNA sample. If von Roth had living relatives in Germany, distant cousins, perhaps, descendants of his older brothers, a DNA comparison could definitively prove whether Daniel Richter and Dieter von Roth were the same person. May 10, 2025. Genetic genealogy researchers at the University of Heidelberg launched a search for von Roth's living relatives. Von Roth's 2 older brothers had both died during the war, one killed at Stalingrad in 1943, the other dying of typhus in a Soviet POW camp in 1945. But genealogical records showed that von Roth's father, Ernst, had siblings, and those siblings had descendants. Researchers identified Maria Hoffmann, 89 years old, living in Munich, the granddaughter of von Roth's paternal uncle. She agreed to provide a DNA sample. On May 24th, the genetic analysis was complete. Thomas Richter and Maria Hoffmann shared sufficient genetic markers to establish a second cousin relationship with 99.1% certainty. The conclusion was definitive. Daniel Richter was Dieter Wilhelm von Roth. The weapons officer who supposedly died at Peenemünde in 1943 had lived until 1989 in Argentina, married, raised 2 children, worked as an engineer, and died peacefully of natural causes at age 78. He had never faced justice. He had never been held accountable for his role in developing weapons that killed thousands. He had successfully escaped, built a new life, and taken his secrets to the grave. Or had he? The investigation was about to uncover one more revelation. May 28, 2025. Dr. Voss convened a conference in Berlin, bringing together all the researchers who had worked on various aspects of the von Roth investigation. Present were Danish historians, Swedish archivists, Spanish immigration specialists, Argentine researchers, and German forensic experts. The question before them was no longer whether von Roth had escaped, but how, and more importantly, who else had used the same network. Danish historian Dr. Lars Andersen presented his findings first. He had spent weeks analyzing Danish resistance records and German occupation files, trying to identify the network that had helped von Roth escape from Peenemünde to Copenhagen. What he found was more extensive than anyone had anticipated. The network was called Die Spin, the Spider, Andersen explained. It was established in early 1943 by mid-level SS officers who recognized Germany was losing the war. Their goal was to create escape routes for SS personnel and other Germans who would be targeted by Allied authorities after the war. The network had nodes in Denmark, Sweden, Switzerland, Spain, and ultimately South America, primarily Argentina, but also Paraguay and Brazil. Andersen displayed a map showing the network structure. Multiple routes led out of Germany, through Denmark to Sweden, through Switzerland to Spain, through Austria to Italy. All routes eventually converged on Spain, which served as the primary exit point to South America. The network operated through a system of safe houses, bribed officials, forged documents, and financial facilitators who laundered Nazi gold into currencies useful for building new lives. Von Roth's route was textbook spin operation, Anderson said. The fishing boat from Peenemünde to Denmark, the safe house in Copenhagen, the false identity papers, the Swedish transit route, the ultimate destination in Argentina. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of people used this exact same pathway between 1943 and 1945. Swedish archivist Dr. Ingrid Bergström followed with her research into Swedish border records. Sweden, despite being neutral, had tracked German nationals crossing their territory with particular attention. Bergström had found 47 individuals who crossed from Denmark to Sweden between October 1943 and May 1945, then traveled onward to Spain, all using similar patterns, arriving with recently issued identity papers, staying in Sweden briefly, claiming to be refugees or technical workers, departing via Göteborg for Spanish ports. Some of these people were legitimate refugees, Bergström acknowledged. Jews fleeing persecution, political dissidents, but at least 20 of the 47 individuals we've identified had false backgrounds. Their identity documents looked authentic but referenced birthplaces that didn't exist or employers that were covers for SS operations. Von Roth was part of a much larger escape operation. Spanish historian Dr. Mendoza presented the most disturbing findings. He had located passenger manifests for ships departing Cadiz for Buenos Aires between 1943 and 1946. More than 3,000 German and Austrian nationals had made this journey, many with suspiciously similar backgrounds. Engineers, technicians, military officers claiming to be civilians, all armed with documents certifying they were refugees or technical workers rather than Nazi officials. Spanish authorities knew exactly what was happening, Mendoza said. Francisco Franco's government was sympathetic to Nazi Germany. They facilitated the transit of fleeing Germans as a gesture of ideological solidarity. Argentine authorities, under Juan Perón, actively recruited German technical experts. They didn't ask too many questions about wartime activities. The result was a pipeline that transported former Nazis by the thousands to South America. The conference participants compiled a list of known individuals who had used the SPIN network, cross-referencing German military records with Argentine, Brazilian, and Paraguayan immigration documents. The list was shocking in its scope and in the prominence of some names. Joseph Mengele, the Auschwitz death camp doctor, had used a SPIN route through Austria and Italy to reach Argentina in 1949. Adolf Eichmann, architect of the Holocaust's logistics, had traveled through Austria to Argentina in 1950, later captured by Israeli agents in 1960. Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, had escaped through the same network to Bolivia in 1951. These were the famous cases, but the list included hundreds of lesser-known SS officers, Gestapo agents, concentration camp guards, and military officers. And it included weapons scientists. Dr. Voss's team identified at least 7 other engineers from Peenemünde who had escaped to South America using routes similar to von Roth's. Some had later been recruited by the United States or Soviet Union as part of Operation Paperclip and similar programs. Their Nazi pasts overlooked in exchange for their rocket expertise. Others had simply vanished into South American life, their technical knowledge helping to industrialize their adopted countries. The financial trail was equally revealing. Investigators from Germany's Federal Criminal Police traced the flow of Nazi gold and assets that funded the SPIN network. The SS had systematically looted assets from occupied territories, gold from national banks, valuables confiscated from Jewish families, art stolen from museums. As Germany's defeat became inevitable, SS financial officers converted these assets into portable wealth: gold coins, diamonds, Swiss francs, Argentine pesos. This wealth was distributed through the network, providing escaping Nazis with the means to start new lives. Von Roth's cache of 38 gold coins and 50,000 Swiss francs was typical of what the network provided to valued members. The gold and currency weren't gifts, they were payments for information, for technical secrets, for loyalty to the network. June 15, 2025. The investigation team received access to recently declassified CIA documents from the 1940s and 1950s. The documents revealed that U.S. intelligence had known about the spin network as early as 1946. CIA operatives had identified key facilitators, tracked some escape routes, and even intercepted some escaping Nazis. But the CIA had done something unexpected. They'd used the network for their own purposes. As the Cold War began, American intelligence needed German scientific expertise to compete with the Soviet Union. Rather than shutting down the spin network entirely, the CIA had infiltrated it, identifying valuable scientists and engineers who could be recruited for American programs. One CIA document, dated March 1947, explicitly referenced recruiting technical personnel from the Argentine-German community, many of whom reached South America via Spanish ratlins. Another document from 1949 mentioned approaching former Peenemünde engineers now residing in Buenos Aires for potential consultation on guided missile development. Von Roth's name appeared in a CIA file from 1951. An intelligence report noted, Daniel Richter, engineer residing Buenos Aires, believed to be former German military technical specialist, has expertise in guidance systems for rockets and missiles. Low-level approach made in 1950, subject declined participation in U.S. programs, expressed desire to remain in Argentina, not assessed as security threat, recommend monitoring but no active recruitment. This meant U.S. intelligence had known about Von Roth's true identity as early as 1950 or 1951, just 7 years after his escape from Peenemünde. They had approached him, he had refused to cooperate, and they had decided to leave him alone. The Cold War's demands for technical expertise had trumped any interest in pursuing war crimes prosecution. The revelations sparked intense debate within the investigation team. Some argued that Von Roth's case demonstrated the moral bankruptcy of the post-war period, Nazi war criminals escaping justice because their skills were more valuable than their accountability. Others argued that Von Roth himself was not a war criminal in the strictest sense. He had developed weapons, yes, but he hadn't personally ordered their use against civilians, hadn't been involved in the concentration camps, hadn't participated in the Holocaust. Dr. Voss remained focused on the historical facts rather than moral judgments. Our job, she told the team, is to document what happened, to show how the network operated, to identify others who escaped through it, to create a comprehensive record so historians and the public can understand the full scope of how Nazi war criminals evaded justice. The moral judgments are for others to make. By July 2025, the investigation had mapped the spin network's complete structure across Europe and South America. They had identified more than 300 individuals who had used the network to escape, including 47 confirmed or suspected war criminals. They had traced the financial mechanisms that funded the escapes. They had documented the complicity of Spanish, Argentine, and other governments in facilitating the transfers. And at the center of this vast web sat Hauptmann-Dieter Wilhelm von Roth, weapons engineer, widower, traitor to his country, successful escapee. His locked office at Peenemünde, sealed for 82 years, had become the key that unlocked a massive historical secret. By trying to hide his personal escape, von Roth had inadvertently left behind evidence of how hundreds of others had done the same. Thomas Richter's testimony about his father's life in Argentina provided a framework for understanding von Roth's final decades, but many details remained frustratingly unclear. Dr. Martinez spent months trying to piece together a comprehensive picture of Daniel Richter's life between his arrival in Buenos Aires in January 1944 and his death in November 1989, a span of 45 years. Argentine employment records showed that Richter had worked for at least 7 different companies between 1944 and his retirement in 1982. His first job was with Fabricaciones Militares, a state-owned military manufacturing company established by President Perón's government. Richter worked there from 1944 to 1947 as a mechanical engineer, officially designing industrial machinery, but almost certainly applying his rocket expertise to Argentine military projects. From 1948 to 1951, Richter consulted for the Huemul project, Argentina's disastrous attempt to achieve nuclear fusion. Documents from the project show that Richter was skeptical of the project's claims from the beginning. In a 1949 memo, he wrote, "The proposed fusion mechanism violates fundamental principles of thermodynamics. I do not believe the promised results will be achieved." His skepticism proved correct when the project collapsed in fraud and failure in 1952, but Richter had already moved on to other work. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, Richter worked for various Argentine industrial companies, designing machinery, consulting on manufacturing processes, solving technical problems. He earned a comfortable middle-class income. He lived in the Belgrano neighborhood of Buenos Aires, a respectable area popular with European immigrants. He joined no political organizations. He maintained a low profile. But Dr. Martinez found evidence of something else. Richter had maintained contact with other members of the German exile community in Buenos Aires. Argentina's German community in the 1940s and 1950s was large, complex, and politically divided. It included Jews who had fled Nazi Germany in the 1930s, ordinary Germans who had immigrated for economic reasons, and former Nazis hiding under false identities. Richter's social circle, based on photos and documents Thomas Richter provided to investigators, included several individuals whose backgrounds were suspiciously vague. One of Richter's closest friends, a man named Hans Müller, was almost certainly Hans Rudel, a former Luftwaffe pilot and committed Nazi who had fled to Argentina in 1948. Another associate, Werner Schmidt, may have been Werner von Braun's brother Magnus von Braun, who had also escaped to Argentina under a false identity before eventually returning to Germany in the 1950s. These connections suggested that von Roth, despite his desire to hide his past, had gravitationally pulled toward others like himself, Germans who carried secrets, who had reinvented themselves, who lived under the perpetual tension of hidden identities. The most intriguing discovery was a series of bank records from 1955. In March 1955, Daniel Richter opened a safe deposit box at Banco de la Nación Argentina in Buenos Aires. The box was rented continuously until November 1989, the month of his death. After his death, the box was transferred to his widow, Elena Richter, who maintained the rental until her own death in 2003. At that point, the box's contents were transferred to Thomas Richter. Thomas had never opened the box. "My mother told me it contained my father's important papers," he explained to investigators. "She said I should keep it safe, but I never needed to open it. It's been sitting in my bank for 22 years. On August 3, 2025, Thomas Richter opened the safe deposit box in the presence of Dr. Martinez, a notary public, and a representative from the German embassy in Buenos Aires. Inside, they found a collection of items that provided a haunting window into von Roth's internal life. First, there were photographs. Not the official family photos that Thomas had seen before, but older images from Germany. Von Roth's wedding to Anna in 1937, both of them young and radiant. Klaus and Greta as infants. A photograph of Peenemün's engineering staff in 1942, von Roth standing in the back row, barely visible. These were images of the life he had left behind, kept secret even from his Argentine family. Second, there were letters. 11 letters written in German, addressed to Mein Liebste Anna, My dearest Anna. The letters were dated from various points between 1944 and 1987. They were never sent. They were expressions of grief, guilt, and longing, written to a dead woman by a man who could never acknowledge his real past. One letter, dated December 25, 1946, read in part, "Anna, it is Christmas, and I am alone even though I am surrounded by people. I have met a woman here, Elena. She is kind. She deserves better than a man who can never tell her his real name. I think I will marry her, Anna. Not because I do not love you, I will always love you, but because I cannot live entirely alone. I hope you would forgive me this. I hope Klaus and Greta would understand. I am trying to build something from the ruins I made of my life." Another letter, dated July 27, 1983, 40 years to the day after Anna and the children died in Hamburg, contained only 2 sentences. "Today you have been dead for 40 years. I have lived twice as long without you as I lived with you, and still the grief is as fresh as if it happened yesterday." The letters revealed a man tormented by his past, unable to fully escape it despite his successful reinvention. He had built a new life, yes. He had a new family, a career, a comfortable existence. But inside, he remained Dieter von Roth, the weapons engineer who had fled Germany, leaving his dead wife and children in a mass grave in Hamburg. Third, there were technical documents. These were the most disturbing items in the safe deposit box. Von Roth had kept copies of some of the classified documents he'd photographed at Peenemünde in October 1943. The documents were now declassified. The secrets they contained had long since been superseded by more advanced technology. But their presence in the box proved that von Roth had indeed taken German military secrets with him when he escaped. There was no evidence that he'd ever sold these documents. The CIA files from 1951 indicated he'd refused to cooperate with American intelligence. Perhaps he'd kept the documents as insurance, bargaining chips if he ever needed protection. Or perhaps they were simply trophies, remnants of his old identity, proof to himself that he had once been Hauptmann Dieter Wilhelm von Roth, weapons engineer, contributor to one of history's most ambitious and terrible technological achievements. Finally, there was a last letter, dated November 3, 1989, 6 days before von Roth died. It was addressed to his son Thomas, written in Spanish rather than German. "Thomas, if you are reading this, I am gone. I have tried to be a good father to you, though I fear I have failed in many ways. There are things about my past I could never tell you, things I did, things I fled from, things I can never undo. I came to Argentina to escape my history, but a man cannot truly escape himself. I worked on weapons that killed people. I did it because I was ordered to, because I believed I was serving my country, because I was too much of a coward to refuse. When my first wife and children died, I could have stayed in Germany and faced the consequences of what I had done. Instead, I ran. I built a new life on lies. I do not expect forgiveness, not from you, not from God, not from the people who suffered because of the weapons I helped create. I only hope that you will not judge me too harshly. I was a weak man who did terrible things, then spent 45 years trying to pretend I was someone else. Whatever you learn about who I really was, remember that I loved you and your mother. That love, at least, was real. Everything else was a performance, but that was true. Your father, Daniel Richter, Dieter Wilhelm von Roth." Thomas Richter wept as the letter was read aloud. "I always knew he was hiding something," he said, "but I never imagined this. My whole childhood, I thought my father was just a quiet man with a sad past. I didn't know he was a fugitive. I didn't know his name wasn't even real." The safe deposit box's contents were transferred to the German Federal Archives for preservation and study. They represented the most complete picture available of von Roth's psychological state during his decades in Argentina, a man who had successfully escaped but could never escape himself. One final mystery remained: von Roth's death. He died of a heart attack on November 9, 1989, the very day the Berlin Wall fell. That evening, Thomas later recalled, his father had been watching television coverage of the wall's fall, seeing crowds of Germans celebrating in Berlin. Von Roth had become agitated, then suffered the heart attack that killed him within minutes. Was it coincidence? Or did the sight of Germany's reunification, the collapse of the regime that had succeeded the one he fled, trigger something in the 78-year-old fugitive? Did he see the walls fall and realize that his long exile might no longer be necessary? Or did he see it and recognize that he could never go home, that he had cut himself off from Germany so completely that even its liberation meant nothing to him? The question could never be answered. Dieter Wilhelm von Roth died on the day Germany reunified, taking his final secrets with him to Chacarita Cemetery in Buenos Aires, where he was buried under a headstone that read Daniel Richter, 1911-1989, beloved husband and father. The inscription didn't mention that he was born in Heidelberg, not Innsbruck. It didn't note that he had once been a captain in the Wehrmacht, a weapons engineer at Peenemünde, a man who had helped build the V-2 rocket. It didn't record that he had faked his death, escaped across Europe, and lived under a false identity for 45 years. But now, thanks to the discovery of his sealed office in March 2025, the world knew the truth. Hauptmann Dieter Wilhelm von Roth had successfully escaped, but he had never been free. The von Roth case forced historians and ethicists to grapple with a complex question. Was he a war criminal who deserved prosecution, or an ordinary man caught in extraordinary circumstances who made understandable, if morally questionable, choices? The debate began in earnest at a symposium held in Berlin in September 2025, organized by the German Historical Institute to examine the ethical dimensions of the von Roth discovery. Historians, legal scholars, Holocaust survivors' advocates, and ethicists gathered to discuss what von Roth's escape meant for questions of historical justice and accountability. Professor Michael Steinberg, a legal historian from Yale University, argued that von Roth should be classified as a war criminal under international law as it existed in 1945. The V-2 rocket program was a crime against humanity, Steinberg argued. The rockets were built by concentration camp slave labor under conditions that killed 20,000 prisoners. More people died building the V-2 than died from its use as a weapon. The rockets were deployed against civilian populations with the explicit intent of causing terror. Anyone involved in the program at any level was complicit in these crimes. But Professor Anna Vogel, a German historian specializing in the Wehrmacht's technical branches, offered a more nuanced view. Von Roth was not a concentration camp guard. He was not a member of the SS. He was an engineer who worked on guidance systems. His work was terrible in its consequences, yes, but was it criminal? Under German law at the time, he was following orders. Under international law, weapons development by itself was not classified as a war crime. Von Roth occupied a gray area, someone who contributed to atrocities without directly committing them. Rabbi Ilana Hoffman, representing the Simon Wiesenthal Center, brought the victim's perspective. Every person who contributed to the Nazi war machine bears responsibility, she said. 6 million Jews were murdered. Millions more were enslaved, starved, worked to death. The machinery of genocide required engineers, bureaucrats, scientists, and officers at every level. Von Roth's guidance systems made the V-2 rockets possible. Those rockets killed 9,000 people in England and Belgium, 9,000 families destroyed, and he never faced justice. He lived a comfortable life in Argentina while his victims lay in mass graves. That is intolerable. But Thomas Richter, von Roth's son, offered a son's perspective during a poignant testimony. "I am not asking you to forgive my father," he said, his voice breaking. "I cannot forgive him for lying to me and my mother for 45 years, but I am asking you to see him as a human being, not a monster. He lost his wife and children in Hamburg. He worked for a regime he did not support because refusing would have meant prison or death. He fled when he realized he would be held accountable for things he did under compulsion. These were not the choices of an evil man. They were the choices of a weak man, a frightened man, a man trying to survive in impossible circumstances. The symposium revealed deep divisions about how to judge figures like von Roth. Some participants argued that anyone who contributed to Nazi Germany's war effort, regardless of their personal beliefs or circumstances, bore moral responsibility and should have been prosecuted. Others argued for a more contextual understanding, recognizing that individuals operating under totalitarian regimes faced impossible moral dilemmas, and that punishing everyone who contributed to the Nazi state in any way would have required prosecuting millions of Germans. Dr. Voss, who had led the investigation from its beginning, offered her own reflection. Von Roth represents something we are uncomfortable confronting, she said. He was neither a fanatical Nazi nor an active resistor. He was the vast middle ground, someone who served the regime out of ambition, fear, and moral weakness. His escape was not the escape of an SS officer fleeing to avoid prosecution for genocide. It was the escape of a man who knew he'd be judged for his complicity and chose not to face that judgment. What troubles me most, Voss continued, is not that von Roth escaped. It is that he was allowed to escape. The network that helped him Die Spin, the Ratlins, the safe houses, the forged documents, was known to Allied intelligence. The CIA knew about it. They chose not to shut it down completely because they wanted access to German scientific expertise. Von Roth's escape was successful not just because he was clever, but because the post-war powers decided that German technical knowledge was more valuable than German accountability. The symposium participants also grappled with the question of how many others like von Roth had escaped. The investigation had identified more than 300 individuals who used the Spin network, but researchers estimated the true number was likely much higher. Perhaps thousands of former Nazi officials, military officers, and technical personnel who successfully fled to South America, the Middle East, and other regions. Many of these escapees were never identified or prosecuted. They lived out their lives under false identities, some maintaining their silence until death, others eventually revealing their true identities when old age and changing political circumstances made prosecution unlikely. Von Roth was unusual only in that his secret was discovered after his death through the accidental preservation of his sealed office. The symposium concluded with a question that hung unanswered in the air. What do we owe to history? Do we have an obligation to identify and prosecute war criminals even decades after their crimes, even when they are long dead? Or does there come a point when historical inquiry becomes more important than legal justice, when documenting and understanding the past matters more than punishing it? Professor Steinberg offered a sobering observation. The von Roth case shows us that justice delayed is often justice denied. Hauptmann von Roth died at age 78, having lived a full life after escaping consequences for his actions. His victims, the slave laborers who built his rockets, the civilians his rockets killed, never got their day in court. They never saw their oppressor held accountable. And now, 36 years after his death, we are finally learning his story. But the time for justice has passed. All we have left is the historical record. The symposium participants agreed on one conclusion. The von Roth case must be thoroughly documented and made accessible to researchers, educators, and the public. The sealed office at Peenemünde, the logbooks, the letters, the safe deposit box contents, all must be preserved as evidence of how Nazi war criminals escaped and how the international community's post-war priorities allowed those escapes to succeed. In October 2025, the German government announced that the sealed office at Peenemünde would be preserved as a historical site. Rather than demolishing the building, It would be incorporated into the existing Peenemünde Historical Technical Museum as an exhibit documenting both the rocket program and the escape networks that allowed its participants to evade justice. The exhibit, titled The Locked Office, Hauptmann von Rath and the Network of Escape, opened to the public in March 2026, exactly 1 year after the discovery. Visitors can walk through the preserved office, see the logbooks and documents exactly as they were found, and learn about von Rath's life, his escape, and his 45 years in Argentina. The exhibit does not shy away from difficult questions. It presents von Rath neither as a demon nor as a victim, but as a complex human being who made terrible choices and then spent decades living with the consequences. It challenges visitors to consider what they would have done in similar circumstances, and to recognize that most of us, thankfully, will never face such choices. March 17, 2026, exactly 1 year after Klaus Bergmann's demolition crew breached the sealed door at Peenemünde. The site has been transformed. What was once a forgotten storage facility scheduled for demolition is now part of a museum complex that draws thousands of visitors annually, people seeking to understand one of World War II's most ambitious technical programs and the moral compromises it required. The exhibit halls of the Peenemünde Historical Technical Museum now include von Rath's preserved office, carefully maintained in the condition it was discovered. The leather chair still sits behind the oak desk. The photograph of Anna and the children remains face down where von Rath left it. The empty space where the metal box once sat in the false panel serves as a silent reminder of the gold and francs that funded an escape. Visitors move through the space quietly, reading the explanatory placards, studying the documents displayed in protective cases. They see von Rath's final logbook entry. "They will believe I perished in tonight's operation. By the time anyone reads this, if anyone ever does, I will be beyond their reach." They see the forged identity papers for Daniel Richter. They see the map showing his escape route from Peenemünde to Buenos Aires. And in an adjacent room, they see the contents of the safe deposit box from Banco de la Nación Argentina, the photographs of Anna, Klaus, and Greta, the letters written to a dead woman, the final confession to his son. These items personalize the story, transforming Hauptmann von Rath from an abstract historical figure into a human being, flawed, guilty, tormented, but human nonetheless. Dr. Helena Voss has become something of an expert on the case. She gives lectures, writes academic papers, and frequently appears at the museum to speak with visitors. When asked what she believes is the most important lesson from the von Rath discovery, she always gives the same answer. This case shows us that history is rarely simple. We want our historical figures to be clearly good or clearly evil, heroes we can celebrate or villains we can condemn. Von Rath fits neither category. He was a brilliant engineer who worked for a monstrous regime. He suffered personal tragedy that might excuse some of his choices. He made decisions, technical and moral, that had terrible consequences. He escaped justice but never escaped guilt. His story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about complicity, accountability, and the moral complexity of historical actors. The von Rath case has had broader implications for historical research into Nazi-era escapes. The investigation team's methodology, combining archival research, forensic analysis, genetic genealogy, and international cooperation, has become a model for researchers investigating other unsolved cases of escaped Nazi officials. At least 6 other sealed or forgotten sites have been identified and are now under investigation, potentially containing evidence of other escapes. The case has also reignited debate about historical justice. Should Germany and other nations continue to investigate and, if possible, prosecute Nazi war criminals, even those who are now in their 90s or have died decades ago? Or should the focus shift entirely to documentation and education, preserving the historical record rather than pursuing legal accountability that can no longer be meaningfully enforced? There are no easy answers, But the Von Roth case ensures that these questions remain in public consciousness, that we continue to grapple with the legacy of World War II and the Holocaust, and that we do not allow the passage of time to erase the importance of accountability. Thomas Richter has made peace, as much as anyone can, with his father's true identity. He participated in the museum exhibit, donating the contents of the safe deposit box to the German Federal Archives. He gave interviews, sharing his perspective as the son of a man who lived a lie. And he established a scholarship fund at the University of Buenos Aires for students studying the history of World War II and its aftermath, funded by the liquidation of his father's estate. "I cannot change what my father did," Thomas said at the scholarship fund's announcement. "I cannot bring back the people who died because of the weapons he helped create, but I can ensure that future generations learn this history, understand how and why people like my father made the choices they made, and hopefully make better choices themselves." As the sun sets over the Baltic Sea, casting long shadows across Peenemünde's memorial complex, visitors to Von Roth's preserved office often pause to look out the window at the landscape beyond. Somewhere out there, 83 years ago, a man named Dieter Wilhelm von Roth walked through the darkness toward a fishing boat, carrying a leather bag and a false identity, leaving behind everything he had been and becoming someone new. The ground kept his secret for 82 years. The reinforced doors of storage facility 7B held fast, sealing away the evidence of his escape. But concrete and steel can only preserve secrets for so long. Eventually, someone cuts through the rust, opens the sealed chamber, and brings the hidden truth into light. How many other sealed chambers remain? How many other offices, bunkers, safe deposit boxes, and hidden caches contain evidence of escapes we haven't yet discovered? How many Hauptmann von Roths lived entire lives under false identities, took their secrets to graves marked with false names, left behind families who never knew the truth? The Von Roth case reminds us that history is not a closed book. New chapters can be written decades or even centuries after the events they describe. Every discovery, every sealed office opened, every document declassified, every DNA sample analyzed, adds to our understanding of the past and challenges our assumptions about what we thought we knew. Sometimes the Earth keeps secrets for 82 years, but the Earth, eventually, yields its secrets to those patient enough to dig, careful enough to preserve what they find, and brave enough to confront uncomfortable truths about the past. The locked facility has been opened. The officer who vanished in 1943 has been found. His story, of brilliance and weakness, of loss and escape, of guilt carried across decades and continents, is now part of the historical record. And in that record, we find not just the story of one man, but a window into how thousands of others evaded justice, how nations prioritized technical knowledge over accountability, and how the consequences of history's greatest crimes echoed across generations in ways we are only now beginning to fully understand. The question that remains as visitors leave the museum and the sun completes its descent below the Baltic horizon is this: how many more locked facilities wait to be opened? How many more secrets does the Earth still keep? And when those secrets finally emerge, what truths about our past and ourselves will they force us to confront?